we're going to start off with the basics of ITIL because that is something which everyone expects you to be. ITIL Foundation certification is something which is becoming a phenomena which has turned into the basic requirement if at all you are getting into IT. Let's try and understand some of the nitty-gritties of what is this ITIL is all about. Let's first of all start off with the basic concept of framework, because everyone talks about ITIL as a framework. There are a lot of frameworks. Let's first of all start off with the examples of the framework. What are those frameworks? There are frameworks which you and me might just be aware of, and quite popular frameworks like ITIL, Project Management, Prince2, COBIT, TOGAF, Agile, Scrum. These all fall into the scope of being a framework. Let's first of all understand what is a framework. They say that there are three major characteristics of every framework. These are the characteristics which will be there in every framework. What are those characteristics of the framework? Every framework is a collection of best practice. Okay. Every framework is non-prescriptive in nature. Every framework is vendor neutral. Now, when I have these characteristics for every framework, let's understand why do we actually follow these frameworks. Characteristics are good to know. Let's start off with the first one, which is it's a collection of best practice. In an organization or as an individuals, do we follow some best practices? Is the answer which we'll have to give. Yes, most of the time we do end up following the practices. Let's not discuss whether those are good practices or bad practices. We do end up following some practices so that we can have the defined results, so that I can maintain a quality or I can maintain the standard. So, if I put across Ishikawa diagram, a fishbone analysis, to identify what is the driving factor which actually goes ahead and drives me to follow these best practices. Yes, as I said, sometimes proven results are the one which forces us to get into, to follow some practices. Quality can be one of the parameters. Standardized quality, making it standardization. Like we know Ishikawa, or like we know the fishbone diagram, these are the primary branches. These are not the root causes. If you have answered results, quality, you're right. However, I'm looking out for this answer which goes into this box, which becomes a root cause for me, which actually triggers me to follow these best practices. The reason why we follow these best practices is the primary intention which comes naturally to us, which is risk minimization. Everyone wants to minimize my risk. I might just go ahead and have a risk mitigation plan. However, risk mitigation plan is still required if at all I know that there are risks. Can I go and avoid the risk? Then the answer would be you can't really avoid the risk, because the proverb says that every activity you do have an associated risk with associated risk attached to it. So you can't be practically risk-free. All we can do, which will be the best interest for us, is help us minimize the risk. And that is what will be documented as a part of these best practices. These best practices are captured by, you may call it as CCTA, which is Computer Communication Telecom Authority, or OGC, or Her Majesty's Office, which is now the body of knowledge known as AXELOS. AXELOS is what it stands for. So, when it started off, these body of knowledge have actually gone ahead and tried to identify what are those best practices which were getting followed in this industry as an IT, which made some companies successful. So, for example, if we talk about, we know these companies who have a global presence, which means the practices which these guys follow as their primary framework are tried and tested culturally across the globe. That is one. Second, these are the kind of companies which have been successful for a longer duration. That means the practices which they follow have been tried and tested on timeline as well. So it is time and culture, combination of both, primarily make them successful. Majority of the practices are followed from the industrial giants like these. and documented as a collection of best practice, so that we as a startup or we who wants to improvise can actually go ahead and utilize these frameworks in order to improvise or optimize our IT structure or IT environment. The reason why we all follow the framework is framework gives us that collection of best practice at one go, so easier for us to understand. That's been one. Second one, which has always been the characteristics of the best practice, is it is non-prescriptive in nature. Being non-prescriptive, it's something which is really nice to be. Sometimes some people say that if you're not prescriptive, then we'll be into an ambiguous environment. But being non-prescriptive, framework does not restrict you to stay in a particular bracket. Framework allows you to have a look at these best practices and then define or design your own best practices. In articulated English, this non-prescriptive nature is predominantly defined as it allows you to adapt and adopt. So if you already have some processes which results are shown are giving you 80% of the results, how do you improve? Probably you can have the analysis done wherein you can come back to the ITIL, understand the processes and then compare ITIL processes to your processes to understand the gap and then probably plug those holes. Second, adopt is if you do not have anything, if you do not have the processes or you want to start off fresh, you can copy paste the same processes as it is and there is every possibility that these processes will work. I mean, this is something in a humorous manner I've heard in my past experience about the programmers usually say that programming is waste, all that work is copy paste. You can actually copy paste these ITIL processes as it is and they should work because they have worked almost everywhere in the IT domain. Non-prescriptive in nature allows us to tweak and twist the framework the way we want. We can change it. It is not that we have decided one way of doing things. We live in a dynamic environment. Things keep on changing. Technology changes. People changes. Client changes. You may have to modify your framework every time and that is why the liberty is given in every framework by being non-prescriptive in nature. The last part why where frameworks will come into the picture, characteristics of the framework, being vendor neutral. It's important to be vendor neutral. These best practices which were captured, which we have seen earlier, these best practices are captured from companies like IBM, HP, BMC Software, industrial giants who have shown their presence over the period of time and have worked across the globe. Although these best practices are captured from these, ITIL never says that you should go ahead and follow, or you should, for some kind of solution, you should be referred to IBM or you should be referred to HP. That is something which never comes into the picture. The moment you become vendor specific, that is when people might just lose the trust, and that is why every framework usually always been vendor specific. The day they become vendor specific, that's when it will not be called as a public framework, it might just be referred as a private framework. So every framework like ITIL, Prince2, BMP, COBIT are known as public frameworks. These are the reasons why the frameworks are usually followed. ITIL being the most successful framework in IT service management has always been or always enjoyed the upper hand when it comes to the IT service management. However, let's understand what is the scope of ITIL, and before that let's understand who are the target audience of ITIL. Okay? In order to subscribe to these videos, please click on this link to watch me further. Thank you.